Let me ask you a question. Who do you think benefited from the CyberTruck incident in Las Vegas or the cruel attack on innocent bystanders in New Orleans? Do you think it was the Green Beret who suddenly decided to give up on life just to tell the American people something they've already known for a while? Of course you don't. I'm pretty sure many of you also don't believe it was Iran or China, because why would they start a war with the US when they are already dealing with enough problems of their own? Well, let me tell you who is likely going to benefit from what happened in the first week of 2025, and it's the same group of companies that always seem to thrive whenever blood is spilled or lives are being destroyed. Yes, I'm talking about the investment fund mafia and their deep state actors. Now let me tell you why I believe this. It all begins with this email, which was released by Sean Ryan during his podcast about Matthew Livelsberger. Now, I've covered the content of this email in a previous video, so if you want to find out what it says, just go to that video about Fort Bragg. However, today we're going to look at this email through a different lens. You see, as soon as Sean released his podcast, this email became controversial for many different reasons. For instance, the very first thing that many people pointed out is the fact that there are these dotted red lines under some of the words in this email. Words like CENTCOM, NIMRAS, Gravatic, and even Livelsberger have these lines under them. Now, I'm sure some of you know that this is a very common feature that can be found in the Notes app on all Apple devices. And these red dots essentially indicate a spelling mistake or an error in your writing. However, this also means that this supposed email was likely typed on a text editor like the Notes app, and people were quick to point this out. A user named Bone replied to Sean Ryan's tweet with, "They obviously wrote this because it has red lines under words they don't know. Sent emails will never have spell check lines. That's only for the right. They used a text editor. There is no email. You can see the cursor for where they can type. This was forged in a text editor by Sean Ryan 762 and Samasor. You better have answers tomorrow because a lot of people are mad you lied." This tweet blew up, and to his credit, this guy didn't just stop with the red dotted lines. He showed another strange thing about this email. After noticing an extra space in the computer-generated email address, he wrote, "Wow, do you see that extra space? They edited this. A computer doesn't do an extra space there. That's human error. They typed this themselves. Evil bunch of feds. What did they have to gain from this?" Now, I know this might seem like a trivial thing, but you have to understand that this email is the only evidence we have for the scary claims made on that podcast. I think it is not just fair to scrutinize this email, but also very important that we do so right now before this tragedy gets exploited by someone for their own benefit. And while the last 2 points made by people are not that damning, the email also has another major discrepancy. And let's hear what Ian Carroll has to say about it.
Where he had Sam Shoemate on, who had apparently gotten an email from this Green Beret dude the day before the bombing. And the email is crazy spicy, but it's a little suspicious. If you haven't seen the Sean Ryan Show podcast episode yet, you should watch at least the first 30 to 45 minutes. Put it on 2 times speed. You should not believe everything that is said at face value. Remember, both these guys are military intelligence assets, former and current. This is the alleged email that Mr. Shoemate received. But notice that there are spell check red squigglies in here. And there's a cursor. And we've learned this before. This is not how an email appears when it is received in your inbox. This is how an email appears when you're typing it.
I almost forgot about the cursor, so thank you, Ian, for reminding me of it. Now, if you've ever written anything, you would know that this cursor line only appears if you're able to edit that piece of writing. It just won't show up if you're clicking on an email that you received from someone, so this is another big red flag. But things only get even weirder, so let's see what else Ian has to say.
But then in the email, he gives, as confirmation that he is who he says he is. First off, I'm not under duress or hostile influence or control. My first car was a 2006 black Ford Mustang V6 for verification. Well, people verified. People pulled his vehicle records, and actually he has never owned a 1996, was it? Ford Mustang, or a 2006 Ford Mustang, but his first car was a Ford Mustang, just totally different year. So it's not really like, could be that because it's 30 years ago, like it's his own car 20 years ago and he just forgot the year. It could be like, why would you put the wrong verification in? Like, you'd think if it was someone else faking the letter, they would get the right verification because they wanted to get verified. You think if it was him, like maybe he misremembered it. Maybe it's an intentional misverification. People are like, oh, maybe it was in his parents' name because everyone's first cars are in their parents' name. Well, people pulled his parents' car records too. Check out Landry22 if you want to see those on X.
As you can see, Matthew apparently gave wrong details about himself as a way to prove his identity. Does that make any sense? And I was surprised to find out that this fact was also first revealed by Bone, the same guy who's been single-handedly exposing this whole madness. Now, after these revelations, I only see two possibilities. Either Sean and this Sam Shoemade guy failed to notice discrepancies that a random X user was able to spot in less than a day, or they both intentionally tried to assign a very different meaning to Matthew Livelberger's actions. In either case, Sean messed up big time and a lot of people were pretty upset about it. While replying to his tweets, one user wrote, "Here is a reminder, Sean Ryan is ex-CIA, and watch most of the episodes that he puts out, but this is absolutely wild. This could be a huge psyop trying to get everyone worked up." And that's a very important piece of the puzzle that many people seem to not even remember while watching the Sean Ryan podcast. Sean is a former Navy SEAL and CIA contractor who has spent 14 years working in different parts of the world. Sam Shoemade also happens to be an intelligence officer, which gives a very different meaning to what they told us in that podcast. For instance, in the same podcast, they also talked about this.
That confirmed independently of each other that some Iranian-made man pads, so surface-to-air missiles, had come across the border.
And Sean even reiterated this.
So we now have Iranian missiles. Who knows how many?
And
inside the United States.
Now, the problem is that they gave no proof of this claim, which, if proven to be true, should concern all of us. But as of right now, it just looks like fear-mongering, and people were once again quick to dunk on Sean for even putting it in the podcast. One user wrote, "So you're definitely being told to push this Iran stuff. LOL. Literally, nobody is worried about Iran. Iran isn't even worried about Iran." While this reply is kind of funny and lighthearted, the next one is pretty harsh. Iranian missiles in the US. Yes, sure, buddy. Sounds totally believable since our government is trying to drag us to war with Iran. Good one. I actually used to enjoy your pod, but you are truly in the pockets of deep state. Now look, I don't know about Sean's intentions, but this bit about Iran perfectly mimics mainstream media, which has been trying to push us into a war for a while now. I mean, just look at these headlines from just one newspaper. So you can understand why people are so skeptical of Sean and his guests. And Sam isn't even the first guest on Sean's podcast who has talked about foreign attacks. Just recently, he had Sarah Adams on his podcast, and she also happens to be a former CIA agent. She made some rather interesting predictions in that episode, and this is just one of them.
How certain are you that we'll see something in 2025?
I'm certain we'll either have embassy attacks in 2025 or the Homeland attack, or both.
I'd say she was pretty spot on with that one. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I would certainly love to know how she predicted that so perfectly. I mean, I think that information might help us stop future attacks, but we all know that won't happen. All of this stinks of a psyop, and the more you look into it, the less believable their excuses become. For instance, the email says Matthew was trying to get out of the US. Well, then this user has asked a pretty fair question. In an X post, he wrote, "The whole thing is sketchy. You're telling me a guy worried about being followed takes a giant tracking beacon of a Tesla CyberTruck. A guy worried about being abducted uses a vehicle that takes a few hours to charge up, leaving him on a predictable path and exposed for long durations. LOL GTFO. I think this might be the biggest problem I have with this supposed manifesto. Why would a trained special forces operative rent a Cybertruck while running away from authorities? Because of the Cybertruck, we even have a lot of footage of him on different charging stations. Then there's the whole mystery about his head moving just before the explosion. Now, I can't show that video here on YouTube, but I'm sure many of you have seen it. In the video, you can clearly see his head moving, which doesn't work with the official story at all. Remember, the cops told us that he shot himself in the head with a Desert Eagle 50 caliber. That is a literal hand cannon, so there's no way he would have survived that, let alone be conscious enough to move his head. And now you know why myself and so many other people think this is all a ploy to start yet another conflict. But how does that relate to BlackRock? Well, in a previous video, I've explained how these investment funds pretty much own all the big weapons manufacturers. And this is how much money those manufacturers have made during the Ukraine war. In a study published last year, it was revealed that the big five weapons manufacturers have routinely split $150 billion, or around 20% of the Pentagon's yearly budget. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis has brought the big five even more contracts. Lockheed Martin, for instance, won a $4.8 billion deal from the U.S. Army for guided multiple launch rocket systems. The U.S. Army had also awarded Raytheon Missiles and Defense a contract worth as much as $1.2 billion to deliver 6 national advanced surface-to-air missile system batteries for Ukraine. That was according to Defense News back in December of 2022. And keep in mind, we aren't even directly involved in this conflict. Just imagine the kind of money that would go to these companies if a war broke out between Iran and the US. And while we were all consumed by the news of these attacks, Joe Biden quietly sent another $2.5 billion directly to Ukraine in the name of military assistance. Now, on one hand, all of this money is going to these arms manufacturers, and on the other, this is what you'll still find in many parts of North Carolina. So while we act like the savior of the free world, people in our heartland are living in absolutely horrifying conditions. And if you're wondering why these deep state actors are all of a sudden so eager to create chaos, the answer is simple. After a very, very long time, someone has won the presidential election after promising an end to these perpetual wars. And Donald Trump has reiterated these views even after his win.
More difficult is going to be the Russia-Ukraine situation. I see that as more difficult. I don't think they should have allowed missiles to be shot 200 miles into Russia. I think that was a bad thing. And that brought the Koreans in, North Korea, another man I get along with very well. I'm the only one that does. But that did a lot of bad things. I don't think that should have been allowed. Not when there's a possibility, and certainly not just weeks before I take over. Why would they do that without asking me what I thought? I wouldn't have had them do that. I think that was a big mistake they made.
Will you reverse that decision when you're in office? To let those
I might, yeah.
missiles be?
I thought it was a very stupid thing to do.
What should Zelensky, if anything, be prepared to give up to end this war? Do you have anything in mind to end this war?
He should be prepared to make a deal. That's all. Got to be a deal. No, got to be a deal. Too many people being killed. That is a war. That's too many people. Got to make a deal. And Putin has to make a deal.
What deal would you think?
Putin has to make a deal, and Putin would have never gone in if I was president.
And if he really ends up keeping his promises, it will be a huge blow to these greedy corporations. After all, their own employees admit that war is good for business.
Ukraine is good for business. You know, right? I'll give an example. Russia blows up Ukraine's grain silos. Price of wheat's gonna go mad up. War is real good for business. It's exciting when it goes wrong, right?
And at the end of the day, it's just business to these monstrous organizations, and it looks like they are willing to do anything it takes to protect their bottom line. Now, I would love to know who you think is behind all of this. Share your thoughts with everyone in the comments section down below. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.